At my aunt's anniversary party in Austin, I was once again the strange cousin who left a corporate career for pottery. I didn't argue. I just poured myself some lemonade and listened to the whispers behind my back. They asked if I had really left Wall Street, if I was living in some kind of shed now. My mother, as always, didn't step in. She straightened the tablecloth and pretended not to hear. I didn't explain. I didn't tell them that my studio had been featured in Architectural Digest last year, that I had a wait list booked 7 months in advance, that the opening of my Savannah exhibit had people lined up around the block. When someone asked if I even had a boyfriend or if I just spent all my time buried in clay, I just smiled. And right then, like it had been timed perfectly, Mark walked in. He had just delivered a shipment to the Houston Museum and needed to check the insurance on a $240,000 piece. He kissed me on the cheek. I raised my glass and spoke calmly. They had asked what I did for a living. That was my answer. But to understand how I reached that moment, where silence said more than words, you'd have to go back a few years. Back to when everything felt like failure. Back to when I said I was leaving, and no one believed me. I worked at a bank in Manhattan for almost 6 years. My days were long and full of numbers, bonuses, client reports, and the constant hum of anxiety. On paper, I had everything people said you should want: a stable career, good pay, and a chance to move up. But every morning when I looked in the mirror, I saw someone who looked like she was pretending. I woke up tired, went to sleep tired, and in between, I existed in a blur of meetings, deadlines, and coffee breaks that felt more like escape routes than actual pauses. Somewhere along the way, I had started measuring my worth by how fast I replied to emails and how late I stayed at the office. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that once I got promoted or once the next bonus came in, I'd feel something different. But the truth was, I had felt numb for years. I remember the moment I decided to quit. It wasn't dramatic. I wasn't yelling or crying. I was just sitting at my desk at 9:43 in the morning, watching the cursor blink on a spreadsheet, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I was proud of anything I'd done. So I opened a blank email, typed out my resignation, and hit send. That was it. My dad didn't talk to me for 3 weeks. My mom called once and whispered like she was sharing a scandal. She asked if it was just a phase, if I needed a break, if I planned to come back soon. I told her no, I didn't. I wasn't lost. I had made a choice. But it didn't matter what I said. They thought I was making a mistake. I left New York with 2 suitcases, a few saved paychecks, and a sketchbook full of designs no one had seen. I moved to Austin. I had only visited once before, and back then I thought it was too slow, too relaxed. But now that was exactly what I wanted. I found a small garage studio behind a yellow house on a quiet street. It had a concrete floor, a leaky roof, and a view of the hills that turned gold at sunset. I bought a used kiln on Craigslist from a retired art teacher who gave me a discount after I told her what I was trying to do. She said, "If it sets your heart on fire, keep going." I didn't forget that. I started making things with my hands, real things. Clay bowls, plates, cups. At first, they were uneven and soft at the edges. Some cracked in the kiln. Others came out looking warped or too thick, but I kept going. I spent hours sitting on the floor, shaping pieces, starting over when they didn't feel right. My fingers were always covered in dried slip, and the garage always smelled like wet earth. I didn't post anything online for weeks. I just worked quietly, like I was rebuilding some part of myself that I hadn't touched in years. I gave my early pieces to neighbors, an elderly man next door who brought me his leftover rosemary, a woman down the street who walked her dog past my garage every morning. They were surprised when I handed them the bowls, almost shy about it. But then they'd say things like, "You made this?" and look at the curves and color like they meant it. Those were the first real compliments I'd had in a long time, not about my productivity or my salary or how well I performed in meetings, just about something I made with my hands. That meant something to me. Money ran out faster than I thought. I wasn't reckless, but life adds up. Rent, groceries, materials, electricity for the kiln, it all ate into my savings quickly. I started selling mugs at local markets. I printed labels at home and packed everything myself. Sometimes I'd only sell 2 or 3 items, and I'd go home with a sore back and barely enough to cover the next clay order. but there were moments that kept me going. A stranger telling me they drank their morning coffee from my cup. A little girl holding one of my painted plates and saying it looked like the moon. I held on to those moments. In the evenings, I took on small freelance gigs. Logo designs, social media packages for local stores, anything that paid. During the day, I'd be at the wheel or loading the kiln. At night, I'd sit at my desk editing files. There were times I doubted everything. Times when I looked at my bank account and thought maybe my parents were right. Maybe I had lost my mind. But then I'd touch one of my finished pieces, feel its weight, and remember why I started. There was no applause, no big moment, just a quiet kind of peace that grew with every piece I finished. Every week, the shelves in my garage filled up a little more. I bought a better table. I found a cheaper clay supplier. Slowly, quietly, I was building something. Not a startup, not a career in finance, just a life that made sense to me. Something that felt real. And yet, I still hadn't told my parents everything. I didn't share photos. I didn't send updates. I knew they wouldn't understand. They still thought I was drifting, waiting to come to my senses. But I wasn't drifting. I was becoming someone they hadn't imagined I could be. I didn't need them to approve, but I couldn't deny that somewhere deep down, I wanted them to see me, really see me. Not as a disappointment or a failed banker. Just as myself. What I didn't know then was how much further I'd have to go before that moment would come, and how quietly powerful it would be when it finally did. Money was running out faster than I expected. Even though I had saved a decent amount before leaving New York, life had a way of draining it. Rent wasn't cheap, even for a converted garage. Clay, glaze, tools, and electricity for the kiln all added up. I started counting every dollar. I stopped eating out, skipped haircuts, and used coupons at the grocery store. I learned to stretch meals, to repair things instead of replacing them. I made a habit of checking my account every morning and night, watching the numbers drop slowly, then faster. I began selling mugs and small bowls at local craft fairs. I packed a folding table and a plastic bin of ceramics into the back of my car and set up at farmers markets and community events. Sometimes I sold enough to cover the cost of materials. Sometimes I sold nothing and sat for hours under the sun while people walked by. I learned to smile even when no one stopped. I learned to keep showing up. I also started teaching small pottery classes at the local library. They only paid a little, but I took whatever they offered. Most of my students were kids or retirees. We made simple things: pinch pots, coasters, tiny planters. It was noisy and messy, and I went home with dried clay under my fingernails and glitter in my shoes. But for a few hours, I felt useful. I watched people's faces change when they saw what their hands could make. That gave me hope. At night, I stayed up building my Etsy shop. I took photos with my phone, wrote product descriptions, figured out shipping costs, and answered messages. I watched tutorials about SEO and hashtags and tried to understand how the algorithm worked. I posted my work on Instagram, tagging it with words I hoped someone would search. It felt like talking into a void most of the time, but I kept doing it. One morning, my mom sent me a link to an article called "Why Most Artists Eventually Return to Real Jobs." No message, just the link. I stared at it for a while, then closed the window. I didn't respond. There was nothing I could say that she would hear. To her, art was still a hobby, something people did when they had the luxury of being taken care of. I didn't have that luxury. I was trying to build something real, and it hurt that she couldn't see it. Winter came, and with it, slower sales. Fewer people came to the markets. The classes stopped over the holidays. I applied for freelance design jobs online and took a few gigs that barely paid anything. Some nights I cried in the shower because I didn't want to worry out loud. I didn't want to call friends and ask for help. I didn't want to go back. 6 months after I quit my job, something changed. I got a message on Instagram from someone I didn't know. It was short. A woman named Claire said she was a curator at a small gallery in East Austin. She had seen my work and wanted to know if I'd be interested in a solo show. I read the message 3 times, convinced it was spam or a scam. Then I clicked on her profile. It was real. The gallery was real. The offer was real. I wanted to scream, but instead, I just sat there, staring at the message like it might disappear. I said yes. I didn't know what I was doing, but I said yes anyway. I started planning the collection that night. I had 4 months to get everything ready. I worked every day, shaping and reshaping, firing and glazing. I broke pieces and made more. I burned my hand once, sliced my finger on a shard. I kept going. The opening night came and went quietly. I sent an invite to my parents, but they didn't come. No one from my family did. I told myself it was fine, that I didn't expect them to. But it still hurt. I stood in the corner of the gallery in a dress I bought secondhand and watched strangers walk in and look at my work. Some of them tilted their heads and asked questions. Some smiled and nodded. One couple bought 3 vases on the spot. Later that night, 2 more sold. I packed the rest carefully and drove home feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time: certainty. I wasn't rich, I wasn't famous, but I had proof that my work mattered to someone, that it could stand on its own, that maybe, just maybe, they were wrong about me. That night, I fell asleep with the feeling that something had started. I didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid. And in the quiet of my garage studio, surrounded by shelves of imperfect, beautiful things, I whispered the thought I had never dared say out loud. Maybe it's not me who's lost. Maybe it's them. I met Mark by accident. I wasn't looking for anything, really. I was just trying to keep my head above water, figuring out how to ship a few fragile pieces across the country without breaking them. The gallery that had hosted my first show wanted to send some of my ceramics to a small museum in Arizona for a local craft exhibit. I had no idea how to package my work properly. I was Googling everything and panicking about customs forms and insurance when someone told me about a free seminar at a local logistics center. The topic was Art in Transit. I signed up without thinking too much. I just needed help. The room was small, cold, and full of folding chairs. I sat near the back with my notebook in my lap, unsure of what to expect. Mark was the speaker. He didn't walk in like someone trying to impress anyone. He had a calm energy. His voice was steady, not loud, but clear. He spoke like someone who actually enjoyed what he did. He talked about wooden crates, moisture levels, bubble wrap thickness, and how to secure fragile pieces using foam cutouts. I was the only artist in the room. Everyone else looked like warehouse managers or logistics students. But when I asked a question about how to pack ceramics with uneven shapes, he looked straight at me and used my name in his answer. I remember that because it surprised me. Most people forget my name within the first 5 minutes. He remembered. After the session, he handed out his contact info. I took the card but didn't expect to use it. I didn't want to bother anyone. But a week later, when I had a rush order for 3 custom vases and no idea how to pack them, I texted him. He replied within minutes. The next day, he pulled up to my studio in a dusty gray pickup truck and carried out 3 handmade walnut crates. They were beautiful, smooth, and perfectly sized for each piece. He had lined them with soft foam and sealed the lids with brass latches. He didn't ask why I was doing pottery instead of working in finance. He didn't ask how much I made or whether I planned to get a real job again. He didn't act like he was doing me a favor. He just helped. He watched me as I gently placed one of the vases inside the crate. Then he said that what I made wasn't just tableware. It was art. I remember the way he said it. Not with drama, just matter of fact, like it was obvious to him. We started seeing more of each other after that. Not in a whirlwind way. It was slow, easy. One afternoon, he dropped off another crate and stayed for coffee. Then one evening, he invited me to his place and made tacos. Not from a box, not microwaved. Real tacos with roasted vegetables, marinated steak, and fresh lime. I didn't know how long it had been since someone cooked for me without expecting anything back. We sat on his porch and ate in silence for most of the meal. It was one of the best dinners I'd ever had. We never talked about careers much. He knew I used to work in New York, but he didn't push for details. He just seemed to understand that I had walked away from something and was building something new. And instead of questioning it, he made space for it. He came to my studio sometimes just to drop off packing supplies. Sometimes he stayed and watched me work, sitting on an overturned bucket or leaning against the wall. I didn't feel like I had to explain myself when he was there. I could just be. He had a quiet way of noticing things. He fixed a broken hinge on my kiln door without being asked. He brought me a new apron after I mentioned mine was falling apart. He installed better lighting in my garage when he saw me squinting at my shelves. It wasn't about big gestures. It was about being present in a way that didn't interrupt my process, but supported it. Sometimes I'd find a sticky note he'd left inside a crate with a small sketch or a joke. Once, he brought me a book about Japanese ceramics, just because he thought I'd like the patterns. He never called attention to any of it. He just showed up, and I realized that support doesn't always come as applause or advice. Sometimes it's someone sanding down the edges of a crate so your work doesn't chip. Sometimes it's someone making tacos because they know you've been too tired to cook. Sometimes it's someone who lets you have your silence but stays anyway. Mark wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. He didn't fill the space with words. But in his own steady way, he became part of the rhythm of my life. When things felt too heavy or uncertain, I knew he would still be there, somewhere between the deliveries and the dinners, holding steady. I didn't know what we were yet. I wasn't thinking in labels. I was just grateful for the peace he brought with him, for the way he saw my work and took it seriously, for how he made the chaos feel manageable. I hadn't planned on meeting someone like him, but he walked into my life like a carefully built crate, quiet, solid, and exactly what I didn't know I needed. And I had no idea then how much his presence would change everything in the months to come. About a week before the anniversary party, my phone rang. I saw my mom's name and almost didn't answer, but I picked up, and the moment she spoke, I felt that familiar knot tighten in my stomach. Her voice was low and stiff, like she was delivering bad news, the way she had when distant relatives passed or when the family dog got sick. She said everyone would be at the party. It would mean a lot if I came. Then, after a long pause, she added that I should probably come alone. She didn't say his name. She didn't have to. I heard the hesitation, the unspoken judgment. She still couldn't say Mark's name out loud, like it was something shameful or unnecessary. I said I'd come. I didn't argue or ask why. I had already learned that these conversations never led anywhere useful. I just hung up and stared at the wall for a few minutes. I wasn't surprised. Not really. But that didn't make it hurt any less. I didn't tell Mark. I didn't want to explain what I wasn't sure I could even name. The day of the party was hot and windless. I wore a soft blue dress and simple earrings. Nothing loud. Nothing that would draw too much attention. The venue was a rented banquet hall, the kind the family used for every big gathering. Birthdays, anniversaries, even baby showers. Inside, everything was the same as always. Round tables covered in white cloths, napkins folded into triangles, trays of food lined up along the buffet with tiny labels in cursive. My aunts stood in clusters near the punch bowl, my uncles watched the game on a muted screen in the corner, and my cousins flitted around taking photos for Instagram. No one said anything outright, but I felt the shift in the air the moment I walked in. The half-second delay before they smiled, the quick glances at my left hand, the silent inventory. People asked about my work with that same tilt in their voice, like they were trying to figure out if I was still playing with clay or if I had come to my senses. I answered politely. I said business was going well. I kept my answers short. The whispers started before the first toast. I heard them behind me while I helped refill the drink table. Is she here alone? What happened to that guy? There was a picture once, right? Did she make him up? I stirred the lemonade and didn't turn around. I had learned how to smile without letting it reach my eyes. I had also learned how to stand still when I wanted to walk out. My mom passed by me at one point, adjusting the tablecloth. She didn't say much, just smoothed the wrinkles and moved a vase 2 inches to the left. I think that was her way of pretending nothing was wrong. I helped pass out plates. I complimented the cake. I avoided the photo booth because I didn't want another image of myself alone, framed by glittery decorations and forced laughter. Then my cousin, the same one who once said I was brave for leaving New York, came over and tilted her head in that way people do when they're pretending to be curious. She asked if I had thought about going back to work. Like, real work. Something normal. Something stable. Something that made sense. I looked at her for a moment, not angry, just tired. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I excused myself and stepped outside. The parking lot was empty, except for a few cars and a man unloading trays of food from a van. I stood under a small patch of shade and let the silence settle over me. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just stood there and let the feeling rise, this sharp, silent ache in my chest that I couldn't quite name. I had done so much work to build something real, something that felt like mine. But in rooms like this, it never seemed to count. I went back inside and kept moving. I smiled for the group photos. I complimented the decorations. I danced a little when someone dragged me onto the floor. But something inside me had shifted. I wasn't angry. I was just done. Done trying to prove that my life was worth something. Done pretending that their silence didn't hurt. I saw the questions in their eyes, the doubt, the quiet amusement, like they were watching a phase play itself out. But I also saw something else. A crack, a pause, the beginning of discomfort, like they could sense something was coming but didn't know what. And they were right. Something was coming. Something that would silence every whisper and change everything they thought they knew about me. When Mark walked into the room, it felt like someone flipped a switch. The air changed. It wasn't loud or dramatic. There was no music or spotlight. He didn't rush in or try to get attention. He just appeared in the doorway, calm and collected, with that quiet confidence that always made everything feel a little more solid. I saw a few people glance toward him, confused at first, then curious. He walked with purpose, but didn't seem in a hurry. He didn't smile too wide or wave to the crowd. He didn't need to. His presence filled the space in a way that made it impossible to look away. He was wearing a tailored navy suit, the kind that fits perfectly without looking like he tried too hard. His shirt was crisp, his shoes clean, his hair slightly windblown. There was a small bag slung over one shoulder, which he dropped gently onto a side table. Then he looked around the room and walked straight toward me. The conversations quieted just enough for people to hear him say where he'd been. He had just delivered a shipment to the Museum of Contemporary Art in Houston. 2 of the pieces were mine, he added, almost casually. There was a soft clink as someone at a nearby table dropped a fork. He stopped in front of me and smiled. Not the polite smile you give at family events, but the one that said he was exactly where he wanted to be. He leaned in and kissed me on the cheek. One arm wrapped gently around my waist, the kind of touch that wasn't possessive but grounding. He told me I looked good, that he'd missed me. I didn't say much back. I just nodded, letting the silence settle over us. A heavy kind of quiet followed, the kind that draws attention because people don't know what to say. It was like they were seeing me for the first time, not just as the strange cousin or the one who left Wall Street, but as someone whole, someone real. I turned slightly, facing the table where the whispers had come from earlier, the same group who'd asked if I had come alone, the same faces that had smiled too quickly, too tightly when I arrived. I looked at them and spoke softly, without changing my tone. I said that someone had asked earlier what I did for a living. Then I gestured toward Mark and said simply this. That was all. No lecture, no anger, just a truth that couldn't be ignored. The room shifted. Not loudly, but deeply. The way you feel a storm coming before it starts. People turned their heads. Some looked surprised. Others looked uncomfortable. A few, I noticed, looked impressed but didn't know how to show it. My mother stood across the room, her hands frozen in place as she adjusted a table runner that didn't need fixing. Her eyes followed Mark, her expression unreadable. My aunt, the one who had laughed loudest earlier, was suddenly focused on folding a napkin that kept slipping out of shape. Mark stayed close to me as a few people approached. Some offered polite hellos. Others pretended to be interested in the museum delivery. One of my uncles asked a few too many questions, like he was trying to make sense of it all. Mark answered everything kindly but without over-explaining. He didn't perform. He didn't boast. He just talked the way he always did, clear and calm. He mentioned where the pieces were going next, how one would be part of a design showcase in New Orleans, and how another was already reserved by a collector in Chicago. I watched their faces shift again. Curiosity, respect, a bit of confusion. They weren't sure how to fit this version of my life into the story they'd written about me. Mark excused himself after a while to grab a drink. I stayed behind, letting the moment settle. I looked around at the tables. at the centerpieces and the cake and the endless line of finger foods. It was the same setup we had at every family party. But something felt different now. Like I had brought something into the room that didn't fit the script. And because it didn't fit, people had to pause, recalculate. I wasn't the one out of place anymore. They were. My cousin, the one who had made that comment earlier about finding a real job, avoided my eyes. She kept glancing at her phone, pretending to be busy. A few feet away, another cousin whispered something to his wife and nodded toward me. I didn't know what he said, but the way she looked at me afterward made it clear they were rethinking some things. Not out of kindness, out of surprise, out of that discomfort people feel when their assumptions fall apart. Mark returned with 2 glasses of sparkling water and handed me one. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. We stood side by side, facing the room. The lights above us were warm, but the air still carried a chill of judgment mixed with confusion. I felt it all, but for the first time, it didn't reach me. I was standing in the same place, but the ground had shifted. They couldn't put me back in the box they'd kept me in for years. I had outgrown it, quietly, without asking permission. And deep down, I knew they would talk later, that the whispers would return. Only now, they wouldn't be about what I was missing. They'd be about what they had missed. Later that night, after most of the guests had left and the noise had died down to a low murmur, I stepped into the kitchen to help with cleanup. The counters were full of half-empty trays, plastic cups, and crumbs from too many cakes. I was rinsing off a plate when my mother walked in. She didn't say anything at first, just stood by the doorway, her hands clasped in front of her like she wasn't sure if she was interrupting something. Then she looked at me and said one word. She said Mark was polite, not kind, not impressive, just polite. The way you might describe someone's behavior at a dinner table. It was her way of testing the waters. I didn't respond. I didn't feel the need to defend him or agree. I just kept rinsing the plate. Then she said I seemed happy, not with surprise, not with judgment, just an observation. Like she had been watching and finally allowed herself to say what had been obvious for a while. I told her I wasn't pretending. I wasn't acting like I was happy. I was happy. It came out calm, steady, not angry, just true. She nodded. That was all. Not approval, not an apology, but not rejection either. It was something in between, a space opening up, even if it was small. We didn't speak much after that. She returned to the living room, and I stayed behind for a while longer. I finished the dishes, wiped the counters, and stacked the leftovers in neat rows. Then I left without a big goodbye. Mark and I drove home in silence, not because we were upset, but because the day had been full of noise. We didn't need more words. A week later, my phone buzzed with a message from her. It was a photo. It showed me and Mark standing near the stage, the soft lighting behind us, his arm around me, both of us smiling in a quiet, real way. The caption said, "Finally, a photo for the family album." It wasn't dramatic. There were no hearts, no exclamation marks, just that. I sat on my bed for a long time looking at it. Then I saved it to my phone. There was something about that message that felt different from the others. It wasn't about approval. It wasn't even about acceptance, not fully. But it was a gesture, a recognition, a crack in the wall. It meant she saw something worth remembering, worth keeping. Not just in the moment, but in the record of who we were as a family. She had chosen that image, not of a cousin's wedding, not of her arranging flowers, but of me and the life I had built. And in that moment, I realized I didn't need more. I didn't need a speech or a sudden flood of support. I had spent years thinking that one day I'd have to prove something big to earn a place back in their world, that I'd need success so undeniable it would force them to take me seriously. But what I really needed wasn't victory. It was peace. I had returned, not as someone who needed to be accepted again, but as someone who had stopped asking. I wasn't trying to be included anymore. I wasn't trying to fit back in. I had simply walked into the room with my head held high and let them see me. The version of me that didn't shrink or explain or smooth things over, the one who had chosen her own path and stayed on it, even when it was hard, even when it was lonely. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making them regret their doubt. It was about reclaiming my place without apology. I hadn't forced them to change their minds. I had just lived my life out loud, in full view. I had let my work speak for itself, let my happiness show on my face, let Mark stand beside me without asking them to understand it. I didn't need them to believe in me first. I believed in myself. That was enough. In the days that followed, no one suddenly became warmer. No one wrote long letters or made emotional calls. But things softened. My mother sent me a link to a ceramic exhibit coming to town. My aunt liked one of my Instagram posts. My cousin tagged me in a video from the party. Small things, maybe, but they added up. Something had shifted. Not loudly, not all at once, but deeply. The same way seasons change, quietly, gradually, one warm breeze at a time. And even if nothing else changed after that, I knew one thing for sure. I had finally taken up space. Not with noise, not with arguments, but with truth. And they had seen it. They had seen me.